Hello and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. Today I'd like to talk to you about the results of the work that we did to solve the flooding and invasive species problems and the erosion problems. I'm going to show you some of the results of our work over time. We are also going to show you what we did about the big flooding problem where the water would collect and not move. So we're going to bring that to you today, show you what we did about it, and show you the results afterwards. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by showing you the work I did on making the canals going through the property. So you can see all those curves and the ponding areas that I showed you in the last video. Now you can see how they sort of all connect. So here it is, it's going through the forest. I actually started near the end and went back to the beginning, because that way I could really watch which way the water would want to go as I dug a few meters at a time. Here you can see on the right the moon garden that I spoke about, and here you can see as the canal works its way through the forest. On the right there you can see the turtle garden that I mentioned. Now here, this is the first spring of 2020 after I'd done all the work in the forest. And then it started to bloom all along the canal. These are marsh marigolds. It was just wonderful to see them. They bloomed everywhere, and they really kind of underlined the work that we did, which was kind of nice. And it really allowed us to enjoy as we watched the results of our work. This is the pond. You can see the line of marsh marigolds going through the forest. This is the Chinampa area that I filmed on the last time in the late summer of 2020. You can see a lot of Joe Pye weed there. You can see goldenrod. And here, this is jewelweed. This is inside the forest in the spring of 2021, also along the canal. So this is in later spring of 2021. In early spring, you get the marsh marigolds, and in late spring, right through the summer, you get this jewelweed, which is really nice. It's also called touch-me-not, because when it flowers and when it goes to seed, when you touch the seed heads, they explode and the seeds go flying all over the place. It's really nice coming outside and listening to the birds. Here it is in the summer of 2021. You just saw the turtle garden as we were working on it. And here's some examples of life just coming back to the forest. And, the frogs that would eat the bugs off of our plants. The monarch butterflies that came back. The sycamore trees and other trees that we planted growing well. Here are the curves in early spring. And here's the forest. Here's that tree I showed you that had fallen, one of the many trees that fell. So here's the forest, with paths going through it. You can't even see the canal anymore because of how thickly the vegetation is growing, which is really, really nice. Apart from the paths that we cut through the forest in areas where there was less vegetation, that's where we put the paths. Everywhere else, the vegetation grew really thickly, which was very, very nice. You can see some of the trees that still had to come down when we videotaped this. Here you can see the curves that are all green now, full of vegetation. Here we have a marshmallow flower, where marshmallows come from. We have some wild grapes and some wild elderberry. So our forest really started to turn into a food forest. So with that success behind us, it was time to deal with the major flooding problem we had closer to the house. In the previous video, I showed you this image of the flooding that we saw within 1 month of moving in. The water would drain through a very narrow pipe that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later. It was never enough. It would flood and the water would stay for weeks, sometimes for months. And in every season, in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, and even in the winter, it would flood and we would have water constantly. Our sump pump would be running sometimes, well, it would be running 24 hours a day, sometimes on 26-second intervals. And so it was a problem that we really had to solve. And this area, as you can see, it connects up with our driveway. And so it's a passageway that we would like to be able to use if ever we wanted to bring work vehicles to the back. We would only ever get an electric work vehicle if we needed one. But at the moment, we don't have anything. We don't bring any vehicles to the back. But if we wanted to, we would need to take it on this side because it connects up with the driveway. The other portions, which are full of gardens and full of wildlife corridors and so on, wouldn't be appropriate for that. And so we tried using mulch to build up this area and so on, and chinampas and logs and all the rest of it. But even with that, it was just not enough because the soil beneath was eroding away, which I'm going to explain in a few minutes. And then, as you can see, even all of our mulch that we put in place was underwater. So I'm going to use this map, which we created. We started to draw this in our first year, and after about a year of being here, that's when we really started working on this map. And we started to input a lot of the trees that we were either rescuing in the forest or that we were planting or transplanting. But I'm going to use this map today to talk about how we solved the problem of the flooding. So here is the culvert where the water was coming through, and the canal that I dug, the first ponding area, the turtle pond, the turtle garden, and then here are the curves and the other ponding area, and then here's where we continue to dig the canal, leading all the way up to another chinampa here and the creek. Now, the problem was this side here. So there was water, as I talked about in the last video when I was talking about the turtle garden here. There was water arriving from this area right here. Now, when we drew this map, we still weren't exactly sure where this water was coming from. And so that's why it just kind of shows here. But the thing is, the water was coming from here, and the flow of the water would always be in this way or in this way. Never the other way around. It never went from, let's say, from east to west, nor did it ever go from south to north. It only ever went this way or this way. And we didn't actually see any connection here. Obviously there was water here, there was water here, but here there wasn't anything, let's say, overland. And then there was all sorts of water sort of flowing in this direction, west to east, at several points, and then it would collect here. And but we knew that we had a little tiny drainage pipe here, and I'm going to explain that. And so we wanted to lead the water from here that was flooding, and then lead it to here, because in that image, in that flood image, it's this whole area here that you can see is flooded. Like in that image, there's the fence that's right here, and this whole area right up to the driveway is all flooded, and all along this fence here, all along the back. Now, shortly after moving in, we learned that there was about a 4-inch pipe that was buried here, and there was a little tiny access to it from a 5-gallon bucket that was also buried. there was an access to that underground pipe that we were able to keep clear at all times of debris and anything. And it would go underground right up to about the middle of the driveway. And in the middle of the driveway, it would drain into a drum, just a regular drum, the size of a, let's say, a rain barrel, the size of a beer barrel, whatever you want to call it, about the size of that. It would drain into there, and it would be this would be buried underground, and it was full of gravel, and the water would drain into that, and then the idea apparently was for the water to drain into there, to get filtered, and then seep through the soil, through the ground underneath, out to the creek. But there were two major problems with that. First of all, a buried barrel, let's say, was never going to be able to handle the amount of water that would come through here. As I already mentioned, that through here we could get over 1 million liters and sometimes over 1 million gallons of water coming through here per day. And then here too, the water would pretty abundant amounts of it, and as you saw in that image. And so that small pipe was not enough. But not only that, so when there'd be a lot of water here, that pipe was not enough to be able to allow the water to drain through. The second part of the problem was that pipe was buried. The barrel that would receive the water with the gravel in it was also buried and full of holes, and the water would have to seep through to the creek. Well, I could see where the water was seeping through the creek very slowly, and the problem was it was seeping through the soil, through the ground, and so there was sediment that was being drawn into the creek from underground with that water and getting into the creek, which is a problem because it's a problem for a creek habitat to have sediment going into it. You should never have anybody from any conservation authority would tell you you don't want to be eroding sediment into a creek habitat, into a creek ecosystem. It's not good for the life there. And so that was a problem. But not only was it a problem for the ecosystem of the creek, it was also a problem for this whole area because there was soil seeping into the creek from underground here that was being repeatedly washed through and coming through here, or basically even just washed out here as it would seep into the creek. And so we were having a major erosion problem, and this whole area was basically descending. It was getting lower and lower each year. And so we needed to solve that problem. Now, what was the solution? So as you can see here, this is basically where that little pipe was. And why is that? Well, as you saw in pictures earlier in the video, this was the driveway. Well, the driveway is at a higher grade, let's say, than this. This is a much lower graded level, so the water is low, and the water can't flow up. So the water was not going to be able to flow up over the driveway and into the creek. And this driveway was, when it was built as a shared driveway with the neighbors on this side. And so the driveway would come in here and then fork this way and fork this way. And then the train would go down behind the driveway. And so basically there was a wall right here. The water could not get over all of this. It would need to get under. And so the idea I had was that we needed to have some kind of a culvert in here. Now what I did, and what was very important, was it's very important to do this, and I talked about this in the last video. I called up my local conservation authority, and I got their opinion on this. And but I was prepared. I already knew what I figured the solution would be, and precisely that is what the solution that they recommended. That we put in a culvert through here, going under the driveway, and coming out on the other side of the driveway onto the front lawn here, where the water could pond a little bit in a little sort of ponded garden with stone and so on, and some kind of fabric to prevent any soil erosion under the stone. And so the water would come through here, come back out the culvert, get filtered through the stone, and then go into the creek without any sediment coming with it. And so that is what we did. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that now. And but before I go, I'd just like to say this map is a wonderful map, and I was going to talk about it in this video, but I don't want this video to be too long. But maybe in a future video, because what this map shows is a lot of the forestry stewardship that we worked on. And so you can see in here, here with the key down here, this key shows all of the native trees that we either planted onto our property, onto the land, or that we freed up from being strangled by the buckthorn or from getting drowned in water. So there are quite a number of species that were already here, native species. For instance, nannyberry and highbush cranberry and elderberry, which were excellent elements for our food forest. But there are other species as well, like white pine, and red pine, and there was oak in through here, and prickly ash, many other species. And also, we also gave a name to each one of our pathways, so that we could know which one we're talking about, because as you can see, the pathways are all indicated here. So if we were looking for certain trees or whatever that we had either transplanted or that we were trying to protect, we could use this map to find them. And so this was the forest in the back. This is the fenced-in area just behind the house. Whenever we have guests who have pets, so let's say dogs, well, they can stay in here. This is the garden in the front, and believe it or not, this little garden here is where we're able to grow all of our food, or most of it. We have other gardens as well. There was one that we put in here, which you're going to see soon. This is our rain garden here. This is our orchard here. We've got some fruit trees in here, apple and pear. Got some plum trees out here, cedars here, and many others. I might get into more detail with this map at another time. So there you go. What we needed to do here was put in a culvert, and this is not something we're going to do ourselves. We had to pay someone to do this because we needed to make sure that it would be done accordingly to the recommendations of our local conservation authority. Because whenever you're dealing with anything that comes into contact with creeks or anything that has to do with water, it's very, very important to work with your local conservation authority to make sure that you're doing things in the right way. And so that's something I would highly recommend. And so let's continue. So that culvert was going to allow us to get rid of this type of flooding that you can see here. And we started, in the meantime, as we prepared to have that work taken care of, we started to work on building up this area in the front where this flood was in order to be able to plant a garden in there. As you can see, we had a lot of work to do. Once again, we consulted with the local conservation authority. This is the work being done to put in the culvert, and here is the result. So whenever there's a little bit of extra water, it can come through there slowly and eventually get filtered through this stone. It wasn't completely finished here. There was a lot more stone put in later, and then go cleanly into the creek. It was quite deep there, right under where the culvert comes out, so that the water could go in there and get filtered. And so I started working on this new garden that I put in after the culvert was put in place. And this was right after they were done working. I finished it up and planted. So this was in May. They came in mid-May, and then right away I put in this garden and started planting in it. And so here you can see the process. I put in some nice mulch pathways. You can see where the mulch is beside the fence over there. That's where the culvert goes in. And we put in all sorts of plants in here. Once again, we created a little mini chinampas here so that these plants could really take advantage of the water that was here. Because even though the culvert was put in place, obviously there was a lot of water in the soil, and so these plants were going to be able to get to really access that water. So there you go. And after the culvert was put in place, we were able to see a lot of vegetation in this area start to grow, and just happy animals. A snapping turtle you see there, and here is an eastern painted turtle. These are out back in the forest. Here you've got some cardinal flower, some yarrow, and some purple coneflower, lots of purple coneflower. And so, you know, when you don't have flooding, then you can grow a lot of stuff. Here's some gray-headed coneflower right here. All these things, all these flowers the animals really love. So we're really happy to see our land come back to life. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it answers your questions. But if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to ask. It'll be our pleasure to answer all your questions. And so have a great week, and we will see you next time.